As much confusion as does exist on the subject of training, and it's almost omniprevalent, there is just as much, if not more, on the subject of nutrition. I hear it all the time with those who call me for phone consultations. One aspect of such confusion about nutrition, which is particularly widespread, is perhaps best exemplified in the story I'm about to relate. Some time ago, I received a phone call from a young man, probably in his mid-teens, who, as soon as he reached me on the phone, launched into what seemed like an endless series of questions concerning certain nutritional supplements. Without even announcing his name, he immediately set in asking me about the merits of a host of popular supplements, including Metrex, vanadyl sulfate, phosphagain, creatine, hot stuff, etc., insisting his lack of bodybuilding progress was due solely to his faulty nutrition. When I suggested that maybe his training might be the problem, he countered with an emphatic no, that he was training properly. Listening to him prattle on a while longer about nutrition, it finally occurred to me that since he was so very confused about nutrition, it was not likely he was clear and clean on the subject of how to best proceed with his training. And I turned out to be correct. I discovered that he was violating all of the laws of nature here. He knew absolutely nothing about intensity or the necessity of training to failure. He wasn't stimulating much, if anything, in the way of meaningful growth. And even if he had been, he was so grossly overtrained, working out 5 to 6 days a week for 1.5 to 2 hours a day, that his body would not have had the resources necessary to produce growth. I finally put a stop to the lengthy catechism and said to him rather firmly, "Young man, you remind me of the individual who earnestly desires a suntan, but continues to insist on making the mistake of exposing himself to the light of the moon, then waste hundreds of dollars trying different suntan lotions, thinking the next one will solve his problem. Not that the issue of the suntan lotion is completely without import," I continued, "but it only assumes relevance within the context of having satisfied nature's first fundamental requirement, which is the presence of a high-intensity sunlight stress. Do you see, listener, that the relationship of nutrition to bodybuilding is similar? While nutrition is clearly of objective importance in the lives of everyone, it has a somewhat different role in bodybuilding. It is only within the context of having first employed the proper training methodology that then becomes important. And then it is rather simple. In fact, as much confusion as exists on the subject of nutrition, it is really rather simple, at least as it applies to us practically on a daily basis. The one guiding operative principle here is, make a reasonable effort on a daily basis to consume a well-balanced diet. Ours has been called an age of complexity, with intellectual confusion as its primary characteristic. This is the result of people not learning to think in terms of fundamentals and principles. A system of thought based on fundamental principles serves as an intellectual blueprint that enables one to answer specific concrete questions. Without such a fundamental base, questions continue to proliferate with no method for answering them, whether the subject is ethics, politics, training, or nutrition. The principle of a well-balanced diet is the fundamental that should guide your nutritional program. A well-balanced diet, by definition, is one that satisfies all your nutritional needs. Once you've made a reasonable effort to establish a balanced diet, consider quality supplements as those offered by TwinLab. The question that logically arises here is, what do I need calories and nutrients for? First of all, you need nutrients and calories to maintain your health and existing physical mass. Second, to provide for the production of muscle growth. 1 pound of muscle contains approximately 600 calories, and since muscle growth will rarely exceed 1/2 pound a day, you won't have to increase your nutritional intake more than 300 to 500 calories a day beyond your daily maintenance level. And I'll address the topic of weight loss later. No matter what your daily calorie budget might happen to be, approximately 60% of the calories should be in the form of carbohydrates, 25% protein, and 15% fats. This ratio is agreed upon by all of the top reputable nutritional scientists, along with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Senate Subcommittee on Nutrition. The reason for the predominance of carbohydrates is that sugar is the preferred fuel source of the neuromuscular system, the most efficient fuel for high-intensity muscular contractions. Also, interestingly enough, the brain lives almost entirely off of sugar, deriving 99% of its nutrition from carbohydrates or sugar. In fact, 80% of the brain is made up of something called glia cells, whose primary function is to store sugar. The suffix hydrate in the word carbohydrate means water, and muscle tissue is not mostly protein, but water, 72% to be precise. Glucose is stored in the muscle as a polymer, or chain of glucose molecules called glycogen, and it is primarily the glycogen that keeps the water in the muscle cell, with 3 grams of water bonded to every gram of glycogen. If you've ever been on a low-carbohydrate diet and found that your muscles became flaccid or deflated after a few days, it was because as the glycogen was used up, the water that was attached to it left the muscle. While protein has been the most overemphasized nutrient, carbohydrates have been the most maligned. The anti-carbohydrate litany began in Britain in the early 1950s and reached its apex in the United States, where diet books by so-called experts blamed carbohydrates for everything from obesity to schizophrenia. Many people still believe that carbohydrates make you fat, which simply isn't true. No nutrient makes you fat in and of itself. Calories consumed beyond maintenance and growth needs result in fat deposition, whether the calories are from protein, carbohydrates, or fat. As stated previously, carbohydrates are vitally important in the diet of everyone, especially bodybuilders, as they are the preferred fuel source of high-intensity anaerobic training, and the brain, which derives most of its nutrition from sugar. So I don't think eating carbohydrates causes schizophrenia. With regard to the issue of getting fat, I used to believe it was common knowledge that excess calories were responsible for fat buildup. Apparently I was wrong. In my many daily phone conversations with bodybuilders from all over the world, I see that many don't know much about the caloric dimension of nutrition. Most remarkable was a client of mine, and Dorian Yates, who happens to travel a lot as he is an agent for some of the top music groups. Last year, while in England on business, I set him up to meet Dorian, and they had breakfast together. The conversation centered mostly around bodybuilding, and the fact that my client was having a very difficult time losing fat. Dorian's suggestion to my client was that he was eating too little, which was why he was fat, and that he should boost his calories from his maintenance level of around 2,200 all the way up to 4,500. This would somehow boost his metabolism, Dorian insisted, and he'd soon be losing fat rather easily. When my client informed me of this upon his return home, I said that Dorian's advice was ludicrous, and that if he followed it, he'd be sorry. He insisted that no, Dorian is Mr. Olympia, he knows what he is talking about, and that he was going to enthusiastically follow his advice and increase his food consumption up to over 4,000 calories a day. 2 weeks later or so, I saw my client in the gym looking rather despondent. When I asked him what the problem was, he said that rather than lose weight, he put on 6 pounds of fat since trying the higher calorie intake. I did not say, "I told you so," but explained it with the simple logic. Look, I said, if one must increase his calories and eat large quantities of food to lose weight, how does one gain weight? By eating small amounts of food while dramatically decreasing calorie intake? I got the point, was his reply. On to the subject of protein. Yes, protein is very important, of course. It is a maintenance, repair, and growth substance that must be taken in sufficient quantities to ensure optimal muscle growth. Indulging indiscriminately in massive excesses of protein beyond maintenance and growth needs, however, will not somehow cause you to grow any faster had you merely satisfied need. Remember, listener, muscle is not comprised mostly of protein, but water. Again, 72%. This does not mean that you should begin drinking gallons of water a day to hasten the muscle growth process. You'll be very uncomfortable if you try it, and the excess will merely be passed out of the body. Don't be concerned with consuming hundreds of grams of protein a day, or so many grams per kilo of body weight, thinking that so doing will somehow speed the muscle growth process. Force-feeding yourself massive quantities of protein could result in fat deposition, Fats are not nearly the bogeyman some make them out to be. They play a crucial role in proper nutrition, in sheathing the nerves, synthesizing many enzymes, and in helping the digestive process. Unless you are directed by a physician, don't take in less than the recommended 15%. Make a reasonable effort each day to obtain a 60-25-15 ratio of carbohydrates to protein to fats. This may be accomplished rather easily by getting your daily complement from each of the 4 basic food groups, namely cereals and grains, fruits and vegetables, meat, fish, and poultry, milk and dairy products. Consuming fats does not make you fat either. Recently, a training client said to me that whenever he eats fats, he gets fat. And I told him that such is not true. That if I was to have him eat a small piece of butter or lard, such would not turn to fat unless he were consuming an excess of calories. Years ago, I had a friend who went off to Montana every few winters or so to climb mountains every day for a month. Upon leaving for his trip, my friend was always rather pudgy, and 1 month hence, after climbing mountains every day, he returned very lean, with almost no visible body fat. While climbing mountains, he lived predominantly on fats, such as bacon, butter, beef, and animal fat. Obviously, this individual was expending more calories through his rigorous mountain climbing activity than he was consuming, and as a result, he lost body weight in the form of fat. The only problem with fats is that they contain 9 calories a gram, as opposed to only 4 calories a gram for both protein and carbohydrates. The point here is that if you're not careful with regard to your intake of fats, the number of calories from them can shoot up very fast, and before you know it, there is fat deposition. With regards to vitamins and minerals, they are referred to as micronutrients because they are needed in such small quantities. Recommended daily allowances of the micronutrients are measured in micrograms as opposed to the grams used to measure the macronutrients. Vitamins and minerals combine in the body to form the enzymes that serve as catalysts in countless important physiologic processes. It is interesting to note here that while most Americans are well-nourished, many bodybuilders are grossly overnourished, yet they still don't see satisfactory results from their training effort. This serves only to underscore the point that training is the first, primary requirement, while nutrition is secondary. It is only within the context of having satisfied nature's first, fundamental requirement, the imposition of a high-intensity training stress, that nutrition then becomes important for the bodybuilder. In looking back to my own bodybuilding career, I too wasted considerable time owing to ignorance and confusion. In fact, when I reflect on how many training and dietary mistakes I made through the years, it is a wonder that I made it as far as I did. I unwittingly allowed myself to become deluded by uncritically reading certain muscle magazines, especially their fraudulent, seductive advertising, which promised that we could all become bodybuilding champions almost overnight if only we would invest considerable money in a certain product. A good example was the one that promised a pound-a-day muscle gains if one were to drink Crash Formula number 7 every day. Yes, it actually promised a pound a day of muscle. A very enthusiastic but ignorant bodybuilder, I fell for that one hook, line, and sinker and gained from 180 pounds to 250 pounds, most of the weight being fat, in 7 months. How clever I thought I was. The only reason I didn't go up to 280 pounds, which was my goal, was because my parents weren't willing to foot the milk bill anymore, as I was drinking up to 2 gallons a day. On top of that, I was growing rather concerned about the stretch marks which began populating a good portion of the surface of my body, along with the fact that I outgrew 2 or 3 wardrobes. The next 6 months I spent trying to undo the damage. You see, it was in vogue back then to bulk up and then cut down, which meant to gain as much weight as possible despite its composition, then lose the fat and be left with just the muscle. Well, by the time I finished getting rid of the fat, more than 6 months later, I ended up weighing but 169 pounds, less than my starting weight of 180, and with less muscle. The near-starvation diet and gross overtraining that led to such a weight loss caused me to lose muscle. So much for bulking up and cutting down. Despite that and other mistakes, I never forsook my dream of becoming an accomplished bodybuilder. All through the years, I read the muscle magazines voraciously, never missing a trick. I knew every fad diet that came down the line and tried them all. And everybody was supposed to train differently and follow different diets because we were told everyone is different. The bottom line, so they said, was that because we were each unique and possessed different requirements in regard to training and nutrition, it was up to the individual to discover what was best for him. No wonder I and untold others were confused about training and nutrition. What a massive contradiction! The very people who were selling us the science of bodybuilding were now telling us that bodybuilding is anything but exact, that there are no universal principles or truths, and they continue with the same irrationality today. Bodybuilding cannot be a science under those conditions. And as much as bodybuilding has been touted as a science, very few have brought critical attention to bear on the subject. As a result, falsehoods abound, severely hampering the thinking of the majority. There is a notion that has been floating around the bodybuilding subculture for years, which has it that bodybuilding is 80% nutrition and only 20% training. The implication here is that it doesn't matter how you train, or even that you train at all. If you will only agree to consume an excess of nutrients, you'll grow muscle beyond normal levels. And such simply is not true, as the nature of the human physiology absolutely requires that certain specific training causes be enacted to affect the buildup of muscles beyond normal levels. Or, in other words, consuming excess nutrients will not undo the effects of an improper training program. More recently, another erroneous idea has garnered considerable attention in the bodybuilding subculture, is that one should consume 10,000 calories a day for best results. And it is the single most ludicrous, crack-brain theory ever spawned in this sport or industry. And it flows from the notion that there is no such thing as overtraining, only undereating. To help ensure that bodybuilders don't undereat, some have suggested that bodybuilders consume 10,000 calories a day, a staggering number of calories, more than any bodybuilder on earth, I don't care how large he is, requires to build larger muscles. When one of my phone consultation clients recently asked me if he should try consuming 10,000 calories a day, I, of course, replied emphatically that he should not, then proceeded to logically demonstrate why such would be absurd. After establishing that my client only required 3,000 calories a day to maintain his existing body weight of 175 pounds, I asked him if he thought it was realistic to assume he would need 7,000 additional calories to provide for daily muscle growth production needs, assuming he was stimulating growth in the first place. When that this didn't seem logical, rational, or realistic, I explained that if he were training properly and stimulating 50 pounds of muscle growth a year, which is considerable, more than most are likely to gain, that this would average out to but slightly over 2 ounces of muscle gained a day. Since my client required 3,000 calories a day to maintain 175 pounds, why would he need another whopping 7,000 calories more to provide for but a mere 2 ounces of muscle growth? Yes, listener, 3,000 calories to maintain 175 pounds and 7,000 calories to produce but 2 ounces of muscle. Such notions are always presented out of context with neither a theory nor an iota of evidence to support them. In logic, these are referred to as baseless, arbitrary assertions. And as Ayn Rand has stated, there is no room for the arbitrary in the affairs of man, least of all in the realm of cognition. With a properly conducted high-intensity training program, you will grow stronger each and every workout. And make no mistake, listener, developing stronger muscles is a prerequisite of developing bigger muscles. Whenever someone starts to argue with me on that point, I say, What is one supposed to do to grow larger? Get weaker? Yes, if you want to grow larger, you must grow stronger. There is definitely a relationship between strength and muscular size. Most obvious is the fact that heavyweight weightlifters and powerlifters are stronger than lightweight lifters. And everyone listening to this who ever developed larger muscles observed an attendant increase in strength. No one who ever lifted weights grew larger without growing stronger. It just doesn't happen. It was discovered by exercise scientists long ago that the strength of a muscle is related to the size of its cross-sectional area. Many are still confused on this subject because they see some who are smaller, who possess less muscle mass, that can lift more weight than other larger, more heavily muscled individuals. The mistake here is in attempting to draw a meaningful comparison between two different individuals. The fact is that the man with smaller muscles will grow larger only as he grows stronger, and likewise, the larger man will grow larger still only as he grows stronger. Don't make the mistake of comparing yourself to others. The only person you can accurately compare yourself to is you. And as long as you are increasing in strength as a result of each workout, you are heading in the right direction. And you will grow, but only so long as you are on a proper nutritional program. You will grow stronger each workout as a result of following the workout suggested on the previous tape. When a person grows stronger week to week, it is proof that there is a positive change taking place inside of his muscles. Since muscles, by definition, lift weights, a muscle growing stronger can't be exactly the same muscle. If it were exactly the same muscle, it would be limited to lifting exactly the same weight. The main point here is that as a muscle grows progressively stronger over a period of time, it is changing somehow. I'm not specifying what that change is now. I will. For now, just remember, if a muscle is growing stronger, it is in a process of positive change. If during this period of change, the bodybuilder continues to consume nutritionally a maintenance level of calories, by definition here, he will only maintain his existing physical mass. He won't lose, he won't gain, he'll maintain. It goes to the laws of physics or thermodynamics. You can't create something out of nothing. You can't build bigger muscles out of thin air. Certain nutritional and caloric values are absolutely required. What the bodybuilder will be doing by consuming a maintenance level of calories is in essence something less than desirable. To some extent at least, he'll be frustrating the needs of the growth mechanism. He did train to failure, which is what nature requires one do to trigger the growth mechanism into motion. Also, he is growing stronger. Therefore, the muscle is changing. When the growth mechanism is activated, you might visualize it as a moving conveyor belt of sorts, for lack of a better image, with a number of little men standing on top who are reaching up, they're reaching out to grab the nutritional caloric cement, as I like to call it, that it requires to build the second story, the new mass. But remember, consuming a maintenance level frustrates those little men. They are reaching up, but nothing is there. The body is only receiving enough nutritional and caloric values to maintain the first story, the existing physical mass. In such a case, the muscle change I was referring to earlier, where the bodybuilder is growing stronger, will remain primarily a qualitative strength change. It won't manifest much, if at all, as a quantitative muscle change, i.e., a muscle mass body weight increase. In order to avoid this, the frustrating of the growth mechanism, and to do the opposite, to serve the needs of the growth mechanism, one must consume a number of nutrients and calories above his daily maintenance level. He must go into a positive calorie balance. This can be done in a methodical, intelligent fashion, such that growth production needs are precisely met, with little or no excess to cause any appreciable fat deposition. Before I explain how that may be accomplished, I'd like to make a few side comments. It has been claimed by some that a positive calorie balance is not necessary to build new lean mass while on a bodybuilding program. They say that the body can literally steal calories from fat and shunt them to the muscles for growth. In fact, this is exactly what Arthur Jones alleged occurred when Casey Viator gained 62 pounds of lean muscle mass during the 1-month Colorado experiment described in my heavy-duty book number 1. He postulated that the number of calories Casey consumed that month weren't sufficient to account for all of the weight gained. Casey was not on a weight loss or maintenance diet. According to observers of the experiment, Jones literally force-fed Casey everything he could shove down his throat, including the kitchen sink. It was calculated that Casey was fed only enough calories to account for 45 pounds of lean muscle mass increase. Therefore, that 17 pounds of Casey's fat was sacrificed somehow to build muscle. As a parenthetic note here, using a sophisticated radioisotope assay test, the researchers involved with the Colorado experiment ascertained that despite Casey's registering 45 pounds of weight gained on the scale, he had also lost 17 pounds of fat that month. Therefore, his total lean mass gain was 62 pounds. While there may be some truth to this claim, I am skeptical. I suspect that either Jones's calculations were skewed and/or he really believed Casey wasn't on steroids at the time, which he was. Steroids are extremely potent chemical agents which dramatically alter the body's biochemistry in many ways, 2 of them being that protein synthesis and glycogen water storage inside the muscle are greatly enhanced. So, while stolen calories may account for some of the lean muscle mass, I believe that the steroids help too.
This is the end of Side 1. Please turn over the tape at this point to continue with Side 2.